right, welcome back to the How to Relate podcast. I am here with Kylie Lambert. Hi,
I
Kylie.
am so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me on, Brittany. I'm really excited for our conversation today and talking about all things anxiety, perfectionism, self compassion. So I'm ready.
I am so happy that you're here. So thank you so much for doing this and coming on. It's kind of funny because the very, very first time we met was a few years back, and it was because we were at a mutual friend's like birthday dinner. And
Yes.
then I saw your Instagram account that was called Living with the Lamberts, and you're doing
Yes.
DIY home decor. And I was like, I think I know her. And so I was like, oh, right. And like, she's also a therapist and she's also in the field. And I was like, I need to reach out to her. so
No, and I'm so glad you did because I feel like that when we actually sat down to meet at some point last year, I just really enjoyed our conversation. I feel like we just talked for like 2-ish hours, just like over a one cup of coffee and just connecting with one another. And it's been so great. And it's been such an honor to get to know you.
my gosh, it's been so wonderful getting to know you too. So happy that we are both here, also from Pennsylvania. Did you ever hear the term halfback? That apparently North Carolinians are called halfbacks because you move halfway between like the Northeast and Florida. And so then we're called halfbacks.
No, wait, that kind of makes sense, but I've never heard this before.
Yeah. It was a term that I learned when I first moved down here and someone said, oh, you're a halfback. And I was like, I'm sorry, what?
Excuse me? What are you trying to call me? What do you
Yeah.
mean?
Someone also called me a Yankee. And I was like, no, no, I'm a Phillies fan.
Wait, 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 I love that, Brittany. No, 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 I'm a Phillies fan. I'm using that now. I'm stealing that.
Please do.
That's an amazing response to that. No, no,
Uh,
no, I'm a Phillies.
which, go birds.
Go Birds!
Go
Yes.
birds. I know. Wild times. All right. So today we are talking about anxiety, perfectionism. These are some of the things that you specialize in.
Yes, it probably comes from my own experience and my own trajectory in life and some of the things that I have struggled with. I knew I wanted to be a therapist probably since my own experience in therapy around 15, 16 years old, kind of struggling with the same things, feelings of, at the time, I don't think I knew how to categorize them. But as I look back at my younger self, it was definitely feelings of anxiety of not feeling like I was enough and trying to prove myself and prove my work, which then came some feelings of depression, of like overwhelming sadness, irritability, isolation, and kind of navigating that. And through my own work with my own therapist, who is just what I needed at that time, I knew I wanted to do this work. And then it just felt like a natural transition for me to create a therapy practice based on some of my own work in healing. And it felt like it really gave me the ability to connect with other high achieving women to help them work and experience a level of self trust and self compassion that they weren't implementing in themselves. That really can be the game changer in working through some of the perfectionism anxiety concerns.
So love what you're saying because I often think that we start to specialize in the things that we've needed for ourselves.
And I used to feel weird about that when people used to ask me like who my ideal client was. I'm like, it's me. I'm my ideal client. And I used to feel really insecure about this is how the perfectionism pops up of like, oh God, that how can I specialize in that if I'm still working on it? It's a continuous journey myself. But I think in getting to know more women in the field and more therapists just in general, I've noticed that I think it's a very natural gravitation that we kind of pick our niches or specialties through, which makes sense through our own relational experiences.
So you mentioned the not feeling good enough, the not enough piece. Where do you think that comes from? Because it's something that we hear a lot. There's a lot of books around it, and I've even seen RCE courses around it's shame and not good enough. And that particular
Yes.
story is so common. So what do you think? What do you think are the roots to this not good enough story?
What I feel like I notice with my clients, I do think it unintentionally kind of all starts with the messaging, from our parents that are communicated to us. And I'm not blaming, parents out there. I think for the most part, everyone's trying to raise and do the best that they can. But I think when I'm really working with clients and we're trying to get to this core piece, I think it's in ways parents have either responded or they're early, even if it's not a parent, whether it's a peer, whether it's a teacher, whether it's someone who's supposed to be a mentor, a sports coach, whoever, it's a message or something that was communicated that made at a very young age created this core negative belief that we're not enough. Was someone invalidating our emotions and our experiences of why are you crying? What's going on? Stop crying. You have nothing to, you have so much to be grateful for. What is going on here? I think it really came in like a dismissing of just emotions and adults being uncomfortable with some children just naturally having emotions, which is going to be really natural as we grow up and experience life for the first time.
That the messaging around quote unquote negative emotions is that they are not helpful, they're not useful, and you need to do something about it. It's a
Yes.
problem that you need to fix.
Yes, it's a problem that you need to fix, which I think creates this exactly what you're saying, this internalized feeling of like, I'm not good enough, or I just need to figure it out, or if I was stronger, I would be able to deal with this, or if I'm feeling X, I'm bad. And then creating a lot of core negative beliefs about ourselves if we're emotional, if we're sensitive, if we're loud, if we're too quiet, if we're not fast enough thing if we're not achieving enough.
Yeah. Because you start to when kids start to identify with how they show up, whether that's in school or in sports or in their group activities, then
Yeah.
I am the smart one. I am the artistic one.
Yes.
The fast one. I am the strong one. And so, and if I'm not that, or someone else is faster, better, stronger than me, then that means I'm not that. And so
Yes.
then it starts to create this belief that there can only be one, or that if someone else is taking that spot, there's no room for me. And even emotionally, if someone else has bigger or stronger emotions than I do, there's not room for me too.
Yeah. I think that's unfortunately how it feels for just a lot of people. And if someone feels this, then mine aren't valid. Or there's always a worst case scenario. Or, just because I'm feeling this, no, is this the worst thing that's ever happened to me? No, but this feeling isn't valid. So I need to step it away and not deal with it and channel it in another direction where I'm going to get validation or where I'm going to be quote unquote seen, whether it's through a praise by a coach or parent, a grade in school that someone is shooting for. I'm going to look for it in other ways.
Right. The comparative piece goes into two ways too. It's the am I better than, or someone else has it worse than me. I just remember the phrase of there's starving kids in Cambodia. If you would ever,
Oh my gosh, I know.
and then you just feel bad for throwing away food, and all you do is feel guilty. But it's not. But when it's just like one blanket phrase that adults use, you start to kind of buy it. You start and you hear it time
You
and
do.
start to go like, "Oh, I must be bad. Is I'm not thinking about everyone else. I must be ungrateful. Is I'm
Yes.
not thinking of the worldwide problems that could be happening right now."
That is something I feel like almost every client brings up, and I'm laughing at the phrase that you use because that was actually the first phrase when you asked me this question. That was the first kind of phrase that popped in my head because I feel like as a millennial woman, as someone like that is like as if you grew up as a millennial, I feel like that was like the phrase. Like there are starving kids somewhere and you're doing like oh my gosh, and there was so much shame created just around that statement of, "Okay, it's if it's not that, then, like, you have no room," and I think a lot of my clients when they're sitting down and we're really unpacking what I call kind of that inner critic or that perfectionism, I call it, like, your inner mean girl. So when that inner mean girl's showing up, like, whose voice is it? What is she actually saying to you? Like, what are the phrases? And for a lot of people, it's the phrases that tend to stick out with them that I think have carried this level of shame have been like this feeling of like, "Oh, I'm ungrateful if I had an emotion," or yeah, basically, I'm ungrateful if I just have any quote unquote negative emotion.
And you specialize with working with women in particular.
Yes, I do. I just really enjoy working with women and helping them unpack some of these things that we've been talking about and creating this level of self trust and self compassion in themselves.
What do you think are common narratives? When I hear this, I think of the word shame.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, what are some of these shame stories that may be common among the women that you've worked with, whether that's in your private practice, maybe it's friends, maybe it's personal experiences, and maybe even your, we'll get to it, but your inner girl course too?
Yes. I think one of what I was saying before, this idea that I'm ungrateful if I have a negative emotion, that I'm not allowed to feel it because it could always be worse. That's a shame kind of narrative. Another one is the idea around productivity and rest. It's the shame of feeling like if I take rest, then I am not being productive. Therefore, I am not being worthy. Therefore, I am not doing something, which creates this level of shame or the I should statements. I should be statements. I think a lot of my clients have, when their inner mean girl or their inner self criticism is really bad, it's like, I should be doing this. I can't rest because I should. I need this. And really trying to tie their productivity to their work because there has been some messaging at some point in their life, in their developmental history, where it's like, oh, being a kid. Okay, a kid's just lying around on a couch. Sometimes we're playing, you're allowed to be kids. That's the beauty of it. I don't think we're meant to work and do all this stuff all the time. But if a parent's like, oh, you're just lazy, I think a lot of my women have at some point had this idea that they've been lazy or equate rest with laziness, which means that they are not worthy or they are not valid or won't be seen if they're not doing more, giving more, and really trying to unpack that with them.
That there's this constant hustle for
Yes.
worthiness, for
Yes.
value internally, and I have to feel that internal value, I have to show it externally.
I feel like if we're not getting the external praise, if someone can't come in our house and see how perfectly decorated or perfectly clean it is, if we don't say yes to everything, we're not going to get that external validation that feeds worthiness wound. How can we also give it to ourselves internally? That work may never be done. There's always something we should be doing, but how do we learn to increase our internal validation?
How do we do that?
Ah, yes, the million dollar question. How do we do it? I think it's through this idea that I talk about kind of with self compassion. And I know self compassion gets a little, I think in theory, we're like, oh, I get it. Self compassion, like self love. But I think sometimes it kind of gets lost or like people are like, oh, I know what it means. But then they don't really actually know what self compassion means. And I think when we're talking about self compassion, the way I talk about it with my clients or the way that I like to break it down for them is kind of through these like three pieces. Self compassion is literally taking inventory and what's going on in the current moment. Like, if we're using the example of like, I want to rest, I'm exhausted, but I should be doing all this stuff. It's like, I feel a level of guilt or I feel a level of shame when I sit on the couch instead of completing 5 items on my to do list because I've been told that my worth is managed by my productivity. Like, we're looking at the facts, like, not the story of the situation. It's like, "Oh, you're so lazy. You just can't do everything that you wanna do. All this, you're just not enough." It's like, no, what is going on right now? I'm feeling this way. I'm feeling overwhelmed judging work and family. I'm feeling this. And then it's just the idea of bringing some common humanity back into it because I think it's really easy, especially now and today with social media, is when we're feeling that inner criticism just pop up. It's really easy to go on social media and think that everyone is happy and everyone has their life together and everyone's home is perfect and there's this beautiful aesthetic and no one's struggling. The universal truth is this common humanity piece is that, yeah, someone's posting that they're at a coffee shop or they have this beautiful aesthetic living room, but that doesn't mean that's like that all the time. That is just a small snippet. There are times where everyone, and I know from my own experience with friends, we've all struggled with this productivity or like this rest and productivity thing. Like, this is a natural feeling to struggle with. And then the other side of that is like, okay, knowing I'm feeling this way, what can I do to support myself? That's really, I think, this big piece in self compassion is like identifying your feeling. Because when you correctly identify your feelings, you can start to deactivate the part of the brain that's being reactive to it. And then, okay, because I'm feeling overwhelmed, disappointed, and shameful, like, what do I need to support myself right now? Does that mean like, okay, I can set a timer for 30 minutes and just sit on the couch, sit with my emotions, see how I feel? And if by giving myself that space, you may find that you actually have energy to complete a couple things off your to do list. Doesn't have to be this thing that derails your whole day. It's like I can take inventory of myself now and I can figure out how to support myself, even if that's asking someone for help because I've correctly identified my emotion and feeling. I now know how to communicate clearly to other people what I need and get the support that I need for myself.
And a couple things have come to mind.
Yeah.
So one, because we were talking about childhood and like upbringing, and
Yeah.
you might remember this when you were applying to college, it was you have to be a well-rounded candidate. You have to have on a resume that you volunteer, that you have sports, you have something in the arts, you have good grades. I think about the well-rounded candidate and I find themselves ragged. And where parents just constant Uber drivers to try and have their kids be well-rounded people, because that's what colleges were looking for. And this
Yes.
narrative was you have to be able to do at least 5 things instead of just 1 or 2 things.
Absolutely. It's okay. You have to extend yourself in so many ways. There is no room for rest. There is no room for sitting with your feelings. There is no room for that. You need to do all these things in order to be accepted by society, college, whatever.
This narrative just got so ingrained that we've, internalized it, and it was our expectation.
And it doesn't just go away. And I say a lot with clients is like, for the most part, I'm working with women probably anywhere from like 19 into their 30s, 40s. So for a lot of the women that I'm working with and even starting to do the work, we have mostly spent most of our life in those kind of systems. Still to this day, we have spent more of our life in these schooling systems that are, bubbles in their own way that provide external gratification, that provide all these systems. And now we're being plopped into adult life, just trying to figure it out. That's gone. We don't get external validation anymore, not in the same capacity as we did in school through grades and projects and assignments, through social interactions, and trying to unpack that now as an adult. And okay, we don't have to be that way anymore. We don't have to be this, perfect person hitting all these deadlines all the time, doing all the things.
It's praise to spread ourselves thin, and
Ugh.
then there's the effortless perfectionism. Do all these things, do it well, and make it look effortless.
Yes. That's where I think this social media piece has really dug its heels in with. And, I can sit there and be entertained by these get ready with me, day in the life, all of this, these really busy, productive, beautifully put together days. It makes it feel like, oh, everyone else is doing it. I'm not. Or if I'm struggling with it, what's wrong with me that I'm struggling it when I can get on my phone and see all these women effortlessly, and I'm saying that in quotations, effortlessly doing all the things in
Yeah.
their day and making it look really freaking pretty too, like it's tied with a bow.
So I also this is a little aside. I'm also like, what do you okay, you wake up at 5 a.m., you meditate, you work out. If you didn't post that you cold plunge, it didn't even happen. And then you go into your infrared sauna. Like, wow,
No,
this is great. And on the flip side, it's a lot of work before not.
that's a lot of work. There's a lot of pressure to do these things too. I think this idea too of like having I've seen it with some of my clients and we've been, just talking about like how do I schedule my day? This like idea that like if you don't get up at 5 a.m., your day is wasted. And I don't love that messaging at all. Was there a time in my life, I will be very honest, because where I did get up at 5 a.m. and I worked out and I went to work because I literally had to, because that was the phase of life that I was in with the job that I had and the commute that I had and everything. But like those days are over and I don't glamorize them at all. I never want to get back to that. I think it's also like what works for you. How do you want your morning? Even if that means that you have 10 minutes to sit on your couch quietly with coffee to just like orient you to the day, that's still just as beautiful as productive as getting up at 5 a.m. and doing the cold plunge and going into the sauna and going to yoga. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
like what did, ugh,
it doesn't have to be grandiose because when I think of
no.
it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be grandiose. It can be very simple and it can feel accessible.
Yes.
What would you say to the person
Ooh.
who is like, Kylie, you asking me to sit with my thoughts for 10 minutes feels like you're putting me into a torture chamber.
I've had clients literally, so they're like, how dare you? How dare you ask me to do that? And I'm like, it's time to lean in. It's time to lean into that discomfort. All I'm asking you to do is just try and see what happens. You don't have to be perfect at it. If you make it 3 minutes and not 10 minutes, hey, that's 3 minutes that you sat out of your day with your emotions, that you gave yourself the space just to try to feel what's coming up. And I just encourage you to kind of lean into that discomfort a little bit. Like, we don't change things if we don't try. And it doesn't have to be perfect the first time. I think as kids, adolescents, we're more likely to try things, try skateboarding, try ice skating, and then, like, okay, we're not really great at it, but all right, maybe we move on to the next thing. But I feel like as adulthood, it feels like, oh, we're an adult. We should have already been doing this for years in order to be good at it. We can just do this and enjoy it. So we just have to practice. I'm just asking you to practice and try something new.
The practice is really, can you practice being in the discomfort? Like, so, because when I think,
Yes.
I'm afraid of what's going to happen with my thoughts. And it sounds like what the practice is can you feel the discomfort and practice the emotion of discomfort that's showing up for you? Then the practice getting to know your thoughts and start to like them. Like, I think that there's this kind of distinction of if we're sitting with our thoughts, that means that we're enjoying it and we're liking it.
Yeah, and that's not the goal. The goal is to just feel them. Like, you don't have to like doing that, but it becomes a necessary practice of just like, I'm trying to understand myself, and that is actually me being self compassionate. If I'm feeling depressed, which is usually an emotion we would put in negative category, okay, but now I have intel about myself. Like, I'm just trying to understand myself. I don't have to like every thought that comes up.
Right. The act of compassion is really challenging. I think that shame and negative thoughts and what people call limiting beliefs keep us very stuck. And by keeping us stuck, they kind of let us off the hook. Compassion is challenging, and it's like a challenge towards resilience because then you're no longer on the hook with these very stuck thoughts. Or
It is a little bit of a challenge, but it's a challenge that when you take the opportunity to practice and understand yourself can give you so much relief and more energy in your day to contribute to the things where you want to show up fully and be authentically yourself.
so this brings us to a pretty good point. How do you define self compassion? How might that be different than social media or other kinds of self compassion that are commonly out there?
Ooh, my own definition.
Yes.
I would say I define self compassion is how do you mindfully, self compassion, let me rephrase it. Self compassion is us showing up mindfully and authentically for all the pieces of ourselves. If I like reframe that again, it's giving ourselves the space to identify in our emotions and learn how to support ourselves.
I like that a lot. What do you think are ways that we can do this? Because I think about sometimes I think about like self compassion can exist on a spectrum of different behaviors.
Yes. Yeah.
S- Where might you begin in guiding someone in doing that?
How I kind of break it down for them is usually the first step that I try to help people when they're like, okay, how do I start being self compassionate? I do think that means being acquainted with your like emotions because I at least know for myself, and this is something that I'm always continue practicing. I feel like I always default to like five main emotions. I'm happy, I'm tired, I'm anxious and like I'm fine, which fine is not a feeling, but like I use the same words over and over again, yet we have hundreds of words in our English language to describe how we're feeling. And I feel like when I'm able to help clients correctly identify what they're feeling, whether it's I'm feeling apathetic, I'm feeling rejected, I'm feeling disappointed, I'm feeling embarrassed, I'm feeling content, it allows them to gain some like self-awareness of themselves to then switch to a more compassionate mindset. So I always recommend there's actually a really great app. It's called How We Feel. It was developed by the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence. And they basically had done a lot of research with the same things I just said, that when we actually correctly identify what we're feeling, like we always use the same words, but when we correctly identify what we're feeling, we actually can deactivate the part of the brain that's experiencing the emotion. And again, that can help us support ourselves better and then communicate our needs to others. So the thing that I like about the app, and it's free in the App Store, is that it breaks emotions down into 4 categories. There's like a yellow category, a red category, which I'm sure you can just as we're talking about, that's like your anger, anxiety. Yellow is like excitement, happiness. And then green is more of like your content, peaceful. And then blue is more of your sad, down, lonely feelings. But then when you click into it, it actually gives you the definition of each word. So and I know there's feeling wheels and stuff like that, and I think those are helpful, but I like that this takes it a step farther. It's like, oh, this is the actual definition of the word because you may think it's this, but then realizing it's actually this. My first step with clients is like, do that for a week. It kind of does like a mood tracker. It can track and do all that kind of stuff, but just work on correctly identifying what emotion is coming up when your inner mean girl or your inner critic is getting so loud. Like when you're getting some of those limiting beliefs or those core messaging, what's the emotion behind it? So that's kind of how I start with people with an emotion about it. And then the second piece of it is once you figure out the emotion, it's like, what's the facts of the situation versus the story of the situation? Because how do we rewrite rewrite the message that that inner mean girl is telling us? The facts of the situation would be like, I am feeling anxious or I am feeling embarrassed because I sent an email and I feel like it may make people second guess my confidence in the field. Or I made a typo in a really important email. I'm like, oh my gosh. The story that your brain's probably telling yourself before you get to that is like, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I made the mistake. No one makes the mistakes. It's like, no, I'm feeling embarrassed because this was a really important work email. And I noticed I made a couple typos and I don't want anyone to question my ability. And so even just separating like that out from I'm so stupid, I'm not worthy, it does take a little bit of the weight off. It's like, okay, no, I'm feeling this way because of this. That's kind of rewiring our thoughts in like a nicer, kinder way.
When I can notice where my mind wants to run
Yes.
into the part of me that feels scared, embarrassed, into those
Yes.
blue zones, like how you're mentioning in the app of like the different colors,
Yeah.
to those blue zones, it can often really lead us feeling stuck. It's like, can I separate out how I'm feeling and the story I'm telling myself versus what happened?
Yes. And can I learn to validate ourselves, which I think comes back into this idea of like, oh, I can take care of myself in emotional regulation. Like, no, I don't like that I'm feeling embarrassed, but because I'm feeling embarrassed, does that create an action then for me to take on? Do I talk to my, mentor? Can I call my mom or call my dad on the way home and be like, hey, this is what's happening? And I think that then allows people to support us, but that also allows us to self validate ourselves because you're like, okay, we're feeling this way. Because we're feeling this way, how do we treat? What do we need to treat ourselves with? What do we need to do to support ourselves through that emotion?
Yeah. It gives us more nuanced data to then say
Yes.
do with it. Because I often think how you even mentioned anxiety and how it
Yeah.
can be a umbrella term for a lot of different feelings.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
it's more granular with the actual emotion, the actual experience. We can do more with it.
Yes. We know how to better support ourselves. We know how to ask for help. We know how to communicate our thoughts more clearly to our partner or our best friend and get the support that we need. I think I noticed that a lot, and I've been noticing that a lot lately. It's like, I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious. And it's not that you're not. I mean, you're feeling activated, like anxiety, it's bringing up an uncomfortable feeling in your body, but it's usually, like you said, it's something beneath there. It's something underneath that term that's really going on.
Mhm. Yeah, we can get down to the body level as to what the somatic experiences are. We
Yes.
in terms of different emotional experiences. And we can talk about from stories that stem from our past and it hit on a place that is sensitive to us. And now we're feeling the effects of that in present time with whatever is happening.
Yeah, it's really amazing the power that like language and like some data like that can really make a difference in our resiliency and even just learning coping skills and learning how to self-regulate and self-trust that like, oh, we know what's going on so we can take care of ourselves. I think it brings some of the power and the control back.
Like how you're saying, like the inner trust piece.
And I think that's what I'm seeing when even with some of the clients, when you break down this perfectionism, the anxiety, it's I don't know if I can trust myself because I relied on external validation or because I relied on X, Y, and Z. I don't know if I can trust myself when push comes to shove and it's just me, then I'll be able to do the things that I can do. And it's how do we strengthen that of like, you have been through all these things in your life and you're still here at this moment. Like, you can handle things when they're difficult. No, you don't have to like it when difficult things come up. That I don't think that's necessarily the goal or what I try to. It's like I just have to trust I can take care of it and I have skills that can help me cope with it.
And so in working with couples too,
Yes.
oh, someone doesn't have to like it. I also say like your partner also doesn't have to like it. And that's in couple.
No.
But like also
Yeah.
I think there are some aspects of our sense of self doesn't depend on what other people like about us too. Or what
Absolutely.
others having the praise and the validation from another person, which it feels good. And it's that someone else can feel disappointed. Someone else can feel disappointed and it doesn't make
Yes. 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 Like they're allowed to have emotions. I know you're talking couples, but I think this works. Like, I do. I absolutely adore my husband. Does he annoy me? And do I have unkind thoughts about my husband sometimes? Yes, absolutely, because that's normal. Like, even your best friend, you may not like pieces about them. And the goal is like, it is okay if someone else has an unkind thought or or may feel a level of disappointment. To your point, that doesn't mean you're a disappointment or you're not a good friend. Like, how people respond to you, that's their job to take care of it. You're allowed to communicate your needs and share this. And if they're disappointed, they're also an adult. You're not a mind reader. Then it's their job to communicate that back to you.
Mhm. Yeah, that it offers opportunity to interpersonally repair things.
Hmm.
I think about this with perfectionism is, oh my gosh, if I did something wrong, I'm responsible for it. Now
Yes.
your emotion and I'm taking it on as my responsibility and I have to fix it so that we're okay. If you're okay, I'm okay. Everything's okay.
Yeah. Other than like, okay, they're allowed to deal with their discomfort. And I think it's this idea of control of like, okay, if I take ownership of it, then it's in my control to fix it. And then if it's in my control, I have more say. It feels really scary to be like, oh, that person is in control of their own life. And I don't know when they're going to come back to me or respond to me. But if we take ownership, if we say, then it's us trying to control the uncontrollable. We can't really control other people. We would love to, but sadly doesn't work that way.
No, no. I like to say you can't write the script for somebody else.
Yeah.
We
I
can't be
love
the
that line.
director and an actor and a producer of our life.
No, too freaking much.
It's
Exhausting. I'm burnt out just thinking about it.
Right? No. So a little bit of a pivot because your social media account is wonderful. I
Oh,
am following you. I've enjoyed following you since you were doing the DIY stuff, and now we're into the mental health space. I think that's also been fun to watch too. So yes, I think the information you provide is very very relatable.
I thank you. I really work hard at trying to be very authentic in who I am and how I show up in session while also just creating some like relatability and transparency around like anxiety, perfectionism, having your own inner mean girl, because I do think these things, while absolutely believe almost every, especially woman, can relate to them. Everyone kind of keeps tucked away, especially on social media where we're looking for the perfect aesthetic and all these things that we were talking about. It feels kind of messy and scary to be like, oh, I'm actually really mean to myself. But I think a lot of people do experience that. So I try to create content just to create some authenticity and just let people know they're not alone. And that being a human is messy. And even as a therapist, I struggle with my own set of things. And how can we all work together to support ourselves to just feel more comfortable being authentic in who we are and all the pieces that may be?
Mhm. Yeah, because there's many. What are your thoughts on the mental health language? I know we're already like, here we go. Mental health language on social media, especially like being like as a therapist who is on social media and showing up, and then imagining even like maybe what you see from a lot of different accounts. Because we were talking before we started recording about how many people will come into us and say, I'm now diagnosing myself with insert diet
Yeah.
because of something I saw on TikTok. And I'm like, that is not this, that's ain't it.
It's it's hard because there's a piece of me that is like, yes, I am, as a therapist and as anyone in the mental, like, you're like, yes, okay, we're talking about these things more. It doesn't have to be this scary thing. We're normalizing therapy. We're normalizing the ebbs and flows of mental health. So there's a piece of me that's like, yes, I'm so excited we're talking about it. But I do think there is a negative with it because of what you're saying is I have a lot of clients, hey, I saw this on TikTok. I think this is what's going on with me. And it's hard because, like, okay, you know what? Like, our mental health, we all have little idiosyncrasies. Our mental health ebbs and flows. So, yes, there is probably something relatable about what someone is sharing about their experience with X diagnosis that may be relatable to your life as well. But I think when we're seeing it over and over and over again, and our algorithms are smart, they're really good. They know what you're stopping on, they know what you're saving, they know what you're sharing, you know what you're liking. It also adds in this level of like confirmation bias. You're gonna get shown it more. So the more you see it, it's like, oh my God, it's definitely me. This is definitely me. And I think it's then hard to separate what you're seeing from what's actually going on. And when clients come in about that, I'm like, what would a diagnose like me? What are you needing? What are you searching for? Do you need validity? Oh, this person, I'm not the only one. And I think that's what I'm hearing from clients is that they're just feeling isolated in their feelings. So when they're finally seeing this stuff, like on TikTok, on social media, they're like, it makes me feel like I'm not the only one that struggles with X, Y, and Z. And I think that's what it comes down is we're just wanting a level of validation. But it is kind of hard to kind of separate, like, okay, this is what's going on, and not weaponizing some of the terms and diagnosis and that and knowledge and kind of unpacking of like, why is this resonating with you? What are you needing from this? What would a diagnosis do for you? Would it do anything? Like, or you just need someone to hold space for you and be like, yeah, I struggle with this. And I think that's what a lot of people are just like, is validity. And so they hear something on social media and it's really easy to grab from it and start using it when it's like, hey, they're just looking for a little bit of validity for why they're doing certain things.
I think about the social isolation piece and
Yes.
how we would have those conversations with our friends more often or other people in our lives that we would be able to receive the you're not alone aspect. Now we can get that with a click of a button and it's
Yes.
accessible and it doesn't really end. I mean, how many reels are out there on these things?
It doesn't end. And there's like a lot of, I mean, the other piece too is like, yes, there are more and more therapists and people and online, but there's also like, where are you getting this information? What makes this person knowledgeable in it? Like, you also like do your due diligence and do your research. Yeah. Cause I've also seen things that are just wildly inaccurate too, but it's like you have at a quick button and you can just get infinite of it just to feed that social isolation piece.
You experienced trauma when you've had parents who didn't validate your feelings. And people are like, oh, this is speaking to me. I'm like, this is speaking to a lot of like,
Yes,
okay,
everyone's parent has probably invalidated them at one point or another. It is I have probably invalidated my friends at one point, or, like, I think it's just human, but it's like that, or like the stuff about like, you've had trauma. if you sleep in X amount position, like your brain is shut off. You probably sleep in a position because at some point in time it was comfort. I don't, you know what I mean? Like your brain, yes. Like at least sleeping recommend that you've had X amount and I'm like, oh gosh, this is not good.
Yeah, and I think and I when I think about this, I think it plays into perfectionism around mental health.
Yes.
I think something wrong with me is because I'm not supposed to be this way. And this idea
Mm.
that perfectionism is starting to get slid in there, it goes overlooked because it's like, but I so strongly identify with this. How could this, like, how this person is like, they're speaking right to me. And it's like, yes, you, and again, how many other people, because that's what makes their content so
Oh yeah,
that's what makes their
absolutely.
go viral. And that is part of maybe how they're making money, getting attention,
Sure.
and it's part of their strategy. But I
Yeah.
have to be so hyper aware of that when we're looking at social media and grabbing onto some of these mental health clickbait terms.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, and a lot of times we're not, a lot of times and I'm guilty of this too. You're reaching for your phone when you're trying to numb out and dissociate, so your brain is not doing the critical thinking element. It's seeing it, it's identifying, "Oh, that's me." Usually, we're going on social or those things start to resonate after we've been on social media for a long time, so it's like our brain is really just, like, not really critically thinking, so it just sees something, it relates to it, must be me. We move on without ever like utilizing that part of the brain. It's like, oh, let me sift through this. Like, what's actually happening here?
Yeah, if I were to get, again, really granular in my own experience, what's actually,
Yes.
but then when we have
Yes.
really us what's happening, it's like, right, that's it.
Someone else, that's it. I don't have to do the work. How nice. I don't have to do the work to identify it because someone else has told me that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because it feels like there's this fine line, and depending on which way you step, it can either be helpful or it can be really dark. And it doesn't, because it is such a fine line, it can be difficult to navigate.
It really can be. And it's hard to get your brain to, yeah, discern what's based in fact, what's based in emotional, what's based in just how I'm feeling right now that I'm interpreting this information.
Yeah.
It's
It's
hard to do when we have a million things going on.
absolutely. Yeah. And context, mood, the day.
Yes. All of it matters. There are some days I go on like, and yeah, depending on the day, social media can be great. Depending on the day, social media can be like, our emotions are going to ebb and flow and be very variable depending on what's going on.
Absolutely. Okay. We could go on about social media, but we'll
I know.
we'll, we'll pivot because I do want to ask you. We talked about the self compassion piece, and
Yes.
I'm wondering how self compassion can influence our relationships. Like, how do you think the practicing self compassion will influence what happens for us relationally?
I think what I've noticed when people learn to be more self compassionate to themselves, I think there's a level of like mindfulness and self awareness that comes from being self compassionate. Even like I said, like even learning to identify your emotions, that can be a really good piece to start practicing it. I actually think we see, and I've noticed this in my own life, like, was I being nicer to everyone else in my life, but being my own worst enemy? Absolutely. But I noticed when I was able to rewire my brain and be self compassionate to myself, I was actually more engaged and more authentic in relationships because I didn't have my inner mean girl or that inner dialogue running of like, don't do this. When my inner critic kind of turned off and I was being more self compassionate, I was actually more present and engaged in my relationships and could actually hold space and have the energy just to listen and engage as I want to with people. Even I think it also allows us when we practice self compassion we now know how to communicate what's going on, which I think then can improve our relationships. If I think about it in any type of like coupleship, partnership, relationship, if we're kind of in tune, if we're just huffing and puffing and being passive aggressive to someone, that can feel, I know when that happens to me, it makes me feel on the other end of it like, oh, I must have done something wrong to do this. But if someone lets me in and it's like, you know what, I had a really tough day at work. This project fell through, this sale fell through. I'm really frustrated that I couldn't. I think I'm actually able to show up more compassionately for that person than if I don't know the details of what's going on. So I think it actually allows us to communicate with one another when we hold space for it and then be able to ask for the support that we need.
When you said it's grounded in mindfulness, it's like I'm becoming more aware and
Yes.
intentional. I'm slowing it down
Yes.
to be able to make the changes and then be able to relate differently.
Relate differently, be kind to myself, be even kinder to other people because I have the capacity, because I'm not just burnt out from being so mean to myself all the time, or that inner dialogue just running rampant that by the time I get to the social interaction, I'm just like existing. No, I actually can hold, like, I can actually listen to other people and respond to them in a way that feels good for me and also just like helps those relationships. And
Right.
I think modeling, I mean, I think we see that, and you're just modeling healthy behavior for other people. Not only you're doing it for yourself, but I do think there's a trickle down effect of like, oh, this person's working on that. I really admire that. If she can do this, if my friend can do this, I can absolutely try to work on this too and practice. I don't have to be perfect at it. I can just practice.
That I can try something different and we can see how it goes. I was thinking about this because the term or phrase protect my peace has
Oh,
become a very strong one. And
yes.
so, what are your thoughts on it? Because here's mine. So I think about the at what is the price to say protect my peace? Because when I hear that, then what I hear is that means I need to set boundaries and I need to not say yes to everything. And taking this in doses, it can be helpful that we are not great at moderation when it comes to even dosing things like boundaries or using phrases like protect my peace. Because what I'm thinking tends to happen is that we're actually pushing people away. Is actually fragile and it needs to be protected. So therefore, I have to set boundaries with you and tell you that no, I can't hang out with you because I'm protecting my peace tonight.
Yes. I see this a lot. Yes. Is it important? I think it comes back to, are we taking our internal inventory? Are we really taking the data of the situation? Are we saying we need to protect our peace if we're in a highly emotional state? Yes. But like, where is this all? I think it's really important to think about, like, when I think about this idea of protecting our peace, I think it's really become this all or nothing thing, to your point of like, okay, if we have to do this. Anytime I feel any type of discomfort, that's bad. That's bad. And I'm automatically saying no to it. And what I think is like, okay, if we're experiencing discomfort, can we just be curious rather judgmental about it? Like, what is it about going to dinner with this group of friends or something that is bringing up a level of discomfort? Is it because, you know what, I really haven't taken care of myself and I've overextended myself emotionally? Is it because I no longer feel connected with them? But I think it's like getting curious rather than judgmental. I think we've gotten in a place where it's any type of discomfort or tolerance. It's bad to get out of my life. And I don't really think that's modeling good behavior, or that's actually, we're doing ourselves a disservice in that way because we're not utilizing those coping skills. We're not allowing for emotion regulation because we're going to get uncomfortable in life. There are things that we tolerance that we have to build, whether it's in a work setting. And I'm not saying you can't set boundaries in those, but I invite people to look at it of like, what boundary can I set that actually allows me the most beneficial and loving relationship with that person rather than cutting them out? If someone is doing something very disrespecting, that kind of stuff, yes. Have I cut people out of my life? Absolutely. But I think it's like being more curious about why I'm feeling discomfort and what I need from the boundary. The goal of boundaries is actually to have more meaning, like setting the terms for the dynamic so you can have the most meaningful relationship. It's not always cutting someone out. If it's like, hey, I realize I'm feeling uncomfortable because I was upset with my friend at dinner and we never really had a one on one conversation. Okay, I can go to dinner, but then can I also make time to be like, hey, can we talk about this thing that happened a couple weeks ago? Or like, if you're feeling overbooked and overwhelmed by your social interaction, does that mean trying to cut them back and just being more intentional of like, okay, I'm not going to go to dinner every week with them anymore, but can I go every other week? Like, it finding ways to have the best relationship and being curious. I think the big thing that I try to encourage clients to do is like be curious about that discomfort, like what's coming up, why, just trying to get more data so you can make more intentional choices.
You're saying how boundaries are meant to keep relationships close because
They are. They meant to like boundaries actually allow, like, they dictate the terms of the dynamic so you can have the best relationship with that person. That's the way that I look at them. Yes. Sometimes a boundary means terminating a relationship, but most of the time it's figuring out, like, it's dictating the terms to have the most authentic and meaningful relationship.
absolutely. I also think about one of the definitions of boundaries being where one ends and another begins. And I think
Yeah,
that I have struggled most in relationships was when I blurred those lines, was when I was almost
absolutely.
into someone else's like one of my friends uses this analogy of like you have the airport like carts, luggage carts.
Yeah, yeah,
You're reaching out onto someone else's cart to take off luggage and hopes that like their load feels lighter, but you're taking it on and they don't
yeah,
or you just feel more weight. And I think
yeah,
in the times where I notice where I end and another begins, I would blur those lines and take on
absolutely.
the other person. In some ways, it's almost like try and control, so to speak, what
Yeah,
so that it would also make me feel differently about them. And that then it was a, okay, what is mine versus what is theirs? And it have really getting clear about what is my emotion and how I'm feeling and how I can't control their behavior. I can only control how I respond to it. And that may be in conflict as someone who's pretty conflict avoidant. I'm like, oh my gosh, setting a boundary, that might mean.
yeah.
However, I think setting a boundary actually means that having a more cohesive relationship.
Yes, and, like, communicating, like, I try to tell clients to rephrase, and I'm conflict avoidant too of, like, it's not a conflict, it's just about communication, and language can be really powerful. There's a way to lean into, "Hey, I need to have a conversation, and you know what? It's really tough for me to have this because I really care about you and admire you, so I'm trying to call you in," and like, it's all just about, like, using the right language and holding space for a little bit of vulnerability of, like, "Hey, I'm trying something."
Yeah, I like that because it as Brene Brown defines, vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Then, yeah, we are practicing that within ourselves whenever we are working within anxiety or perfectionism, and relationally whenever we're trying something new.
Does that mean sometimes the other person gets upset if maybe they haven't done their own work and the relationship's okay? Potentially there's a risk. Yes, there's a risk. But if someone really loves and cares about you and sees you for who you are, maybe there's a little bit of tension for a little bit, but they're going to want to keep the relationship and they're going to want to work with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that it's kind of like, and this is gonna be like the not great analogy, but I imagine it's kind of like you do reps in the gym, and it's like what like
Yes,
grow with like fractures to the muscle, basically, but that's how they grow and strengthen. And I think about that with relationships. I'm like, yeah, they're those like micro fractures actually make room for growth.
absolutely. Like I always, with clients when I'm working, well, I mean, I mostly do individual counseling, but obviously relationships we're always talking about relationships, like our relationships and how we relate to other people. And I think for a lot of people, it's like, okay, yeah, you have the conflict. I'm more interested in the repair. I'm more interested in how you came back after that and what was the dialogue, how you repair. Like, you're going to do things that upset one another. There is going to be conflict, but I'm more interested in like how you call each other back in to do the repair.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful process. It's
Yes.
a process to witness, and when you're the one that's in it, it can feel tumultuous. But then whenever I've thought about conflict and come out on the other side, it's like, oh wow, I'm so glad that we had that conversation. It
Usually it brings people together, that conflict resolution.
yeah, it feels nice. Anything that we haven't touched on that you want to go to?
Feel like we talked about a lot of different things. I feel like we hit all the good points.
If someone wanted a quick and easy practice to start with self compassion or combating their inner critic, what would be your strategy to give them?
My strategy, one of my favorite ones, and I use this with clients, is my favorite way when I am feeling like my inner mean girl. That's what I call my inner critic is really loud. Is I honestly put two hands on my heart on top of one another and create a little bit pressure over my heart and just repeat some phrases to me that allow me to feel more grounded and kind to myself. So ones that I go to, and I think it works. Like I'm not talking about like toxic positivity affirmations, like I'm enough, I'm enough. Usually when I'm feeling activated or my inner critic is very loud, for some reason, it makes her feel like she's unsafe, like she's going to be rejected. So it's like, hey, it is safe for you to have emotions. A feeling is coming up right now, but you are allowed to have emotions and your emotions are valid. Like, or just because I am feeling anxious right now doesn't mean I'm going to feel anxious today. But I think almost just kind of finding like compassionate phrases with putting your hands over your heart and creating a little bit of pressure can really help you kind of come back to yourself.
I like having something that's somatic like that. Yeah.
Yes, for me, it's just like, "Ooh, I'm here. I feel my body. I feel my heart pumping. Like, I'm okay." I don't know if you've seen, speaking of social media, that trend that's going around is like, your brain can't tell the difference between a bear attack and like getting a, "Do you need to talk?" Like, "Can we talk?" text or whatever, because we're still primal beings. Our that part of our brain, even though we're not gonna most likely being attacked by a bear anytime soon or in our normal lives, but that's still part of it's still being activated in the same way. So just telling myself, like, you are here, you are safe. It's your emotions are coming up, they are valid, but like you're okay right now.
Mhm.
And because you're okay right now, you can figure out a way to work through this because you've gotten through everything in your life up to this point.
You've already experienced the hardest things that you've experienced. I so appreciate you coming on. Where should people go and find you if they want to work through their inner mean girl or if they want more information around perfectionism and anxiety?
Yes. So you can always go just directly to my website, which is KylieLambertCounseling.com. As Brittany, as you mentioned, I am on social media. I am on Instagram at Kylie Lambert Counseling, where I just kind of share little tips and relatable moments to kind of work on that inner mean girl and perfectionism. So I'm on there as well.
Great. Well, so good to see you.
So good to spend time with you. I always enjoy our time together.
Me too. You're welcome back anytime.
Yay! I love to.
Yay. All right. Enjoy the day and have a good one, everyone. Stay connected.